Solomon. His name alone echoes through the halls of history as a symbol of wisdom, wealth, and divine favor. He was the king who built the magnificent temple of the Lord, the ruler whose wisdom attracted kings and queens from distant lands, and the man who wrote timeless proverbs that still guide the hearts of the faithful today. Yet, despite all his wisdom, despite all his blessings, despite being chosen by God himself, Solomon fell. And his fall was not a small stumble, but a devastating collapse that left behind a kingdom shattered by idolatry and rebellion. How could the wisest man who ever lived make such grave mistakes? How could the richest king, blessed beyond measure, lose sight of the very God who gave him everything? His story is a warning, a tragic tale of what happens when the heart strays from God, no matter how great one may be. This is the dark story of Solomon, the rise and fall of the wisest and richest man in the Bible. Solomon's story begins long before he was born, in the reign of his father, King David. David, the warrior king, had fought many battles, conquered nations, and established Israel as a powerful kingdom. But his personal life was filled with turmoil. One of the most scandalous moments in David's life was his affair with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. When Bathsheba became pregnant, David tried to cover up the sin, but when that failed, he arranged for Uriah to be killed in battle, 2 Samuel 11. The child born from this affair died as a consequence of David's sin. But later, David and Bathsheba had another son. This child was named Solomon, and unlike the first, God loved him. 2 Samuel 12:24-25. God sent the prophet Nathan to give Solomon a special name, Jedidiah, which means beloved of the Lord. Even from birth, Solomon was set apart for something greater than anyone could imagine. As he grew, Solomon was raised in the palace, watching his father rule. He saw David's successes, but he also witnessed his father's mistakes. And when David grew old, a fierce struggle broke out for the throne. One of David's older sons, Adonijah, declared himself king without his father's approval. However, Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan reminded David of God's promise that Solomon was the one chosen to be king. In his last days, David anointed Solomon as king of Israel, securing his place on the throne, 1 Kings 1:39. But what Solomon didn't yet know was that ruling a kingdom would demand far more than royal blood. It would require divine wisdom. Shortly after Solomon took the throne, he faced an overwhelming challenge. How would he lead a kingdom as great as Israel? He was young, inexperienced, and the responsibility of ruling God's chosen people was enormous. One night as Solomon slept, something extraordinary happened. God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" 1 Kings 3:5. Imagine for a moment, what would you ask for if the Almighty God himself gave you anything you desired? Would you ask for power, wealth, long life, victory over enemies? Solomon could have asked for any of these things, but his answer shocked heaven. He said, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. Therefore give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil." 1 Kings 3:7-9. Solomon, instead of seeking riches or power, asked for wisdom. And because his request pleased the Lord, God granted him wisdom beyond any man who had ever lived, and even promised him riches, honor, and long life if he followed God's commands. 1 Kings 3:10-14. Solomon woke from his dream, forever changed. He had been given a supernatural gift, a mind so sharp and discerning that people from around the world would come just to hear him speak. But would wisdom alone be enough to keep him on the right path? With his newfound wisdom, Solomon's reign became the golden age of Israel. His wisdom wasn't just theoretical, it was practical, shaping every aspect of his leadership. One of his most famous judgments came when two women came before him, both claiming to be the mother of a baby. Without clear evidence, how could he decide who the true mother was? Solomon, in a display of divine insight, ordered the child to be cut in half and shared between them. One woman agreed, but the other pleaded, saying the child should be given to the other woman rather than be killed. Seeing the depth of a true mother's love, Solomon knew she was the real mother and restored the child to her. 1 Kings 3:16-28. News of Solomon's wisdom spread far and wide. Kings and queens from distant lands came to test him, including the famous Queen of Sheba. She arrived in Jerusalem with a caravan of spices, gold, and jewels, wanting to see if Solomon was truly as wise as the rumors claimed. After speaking with him and seeing his kingdom kingdom, she declared, "Indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard." 1 Kings 10:7. Solomon's wealth was unparalleled. Gold was so abundant in his kingdom that silver was considered worthless. 1 Kings 10:21. He built an incredible fleet of ships, established trade routes, and increased Israel's power. But his greatest achievement was the construction of the Temple of the Lord, a structure so magnificent that it stood as one of the wonders of the ancient world. Solomon spared no expense, covering the temple in pure gold and filling it with treasures. When it was completed, he led a grand dedication ceremony, praying before the entire nation. As he finished his prayer, something incredible happened. When Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The 2 Chronicles 7:1. It seemed that Solomon had everything: wisdom, wealth, power, and God's presence. But something was beginning to change. A slow and dangerous shift was happening within his heart, one that would lead him into darkness. For years, Solomon ruled with wisdom and justice, but beneath the surface, a dangerous shift was taking place. His wealth and power had grown to unimaginable heights, and with it came the temptations of the world. The very thing that Solomon had been warned against, the desires of the flesh, the love of wealth, and the allure of foreign influences, began to take root in his heart. Slowly but surely, his focus started to drift away from the God who had blessed him. God had given clear instructions in Deuteronomy 17:16-17 about what a king should never do. 1. He must not acquire many horses for himself. 2. He must not take many wives, lest his heart be led astray. 3. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. But Solomon, in all his glory, violated every one of these commandments. He built a vast army with thousands of horses and chariots imported from Egypt. 1 Kings 10:26-29. He amassed a fortune so great that silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem. 1 Kings 10:27. And most dangerously, he married many foreign women, hundreds of them. These decisions, though seemingly political or luxurious at first, would become the seeds of his downfall. Solomon's love for women became one of his greatest weaknesses. The Bible tells us King Solomon loved many foreign women, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods." But Solomon clung to these in love. 1 Kings 11:1-2. How many wives did Solomon have? The answer is staggering. 700 wives, 300 concubines. Most of these women were not Israelites. They were from pagan nations: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, each bringing with them their own gods and idols. At first, Solomon may have thought he was merely forming political alliances through these marriages. Kings often married daughters of foreign rulers to secure peace. But with each marriage, Solomon welcomed the beliefs and traditions of these foreign nations into Israel. Slowly, his heart was being pulled in different directions. His wives began to persuade him, and instead of leading them to the one true God, Solomon allowed himself to be led astray. For it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. 1 Kings 11:4. This was no small matter. Solomon, the very man who built the temple of the Lord, began to build high places and altars for false gods. He built an altar to Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. He built a shrine to Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites, whose worship involved child sacrifice. He built places of worship for Chemosh, another idol. The same man who had prayed for wisdom, the same man who had seen the fire of God descend upon the temple, was now constructing altars for idols. His wisdom had not prevented his downfall, because wisdom without obedience is powerless. The Lord had been patient with Solomon. He had blessed him beyond measure, but there was a limit to how long he would tolerate disobedience. Then the Lord spoke to Solomon in anger, because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you. I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to your servant. 1 Kings 11:11. However, because of God's promise to David, he would not do it during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, the kingdom would be torn apart after Solomon's death, divided in a way that would leave Israel broken. This was the beginning of the end. The golden age of Israel was coming to a close, and the cracks in Solomon's kingdom were beginning to show. Enemies began to rise against him. Hadad the Edomite and Rezon of Damascus both rebelled, harassing Solomon's territories. 1 Kings 11:14-25. But the greatest threat came from within: Jeroboam, one of Solomon's own officials. A prophet named Ahijah met Jeroboam on the road one day, carrying a new garment. In front of Jeroboam, Ahijah took the garment and tore it into 12 pieces, saying, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." For 1 Kings 11:31. This was a prophecy of what was to come. Solomon's son would lose most of the kingdom, and Jeroboam would become king over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Solomon, realizing the threat, tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt until Solomon's death. Solomon had once been a man after God's heart, but now he was fighting against God's judgment. After a reign of 40 years, Solomon died. The man who had once been the wisest and wealthiest king in history left behind a kingdom in turmoil. His son, Rehoboam, inherited the throne, but his rule was a disaster. Within days, his harsh leadership led to a rebellion, and the kingdom of Israel split in two: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. 1 Kings 12. Solomon's legacy should have been one of glory, but instead it became one of warning. His wisdom was unparalleled, yet it could not save him from pride. His wealth was beyond measure, yet it could not satisfy his heart. His power was unmatched, yet it could not secure his kingdom. He wrote many wise words in his life, but perhaps none were as personal as these found in Ecclesiastes. "I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Ecclesiastes 1:14. Solomon had everything the world could offer, yet in the end he realized none of it mattered without God. His story is a warning to us all. No amount of wisdom, wealth, or success can replace obedience to God. The story of Solomon is not just a historical account, it is a message for all of us. Even the wisest person can fall if they stop following God. Even the most blessed can lose everything if their heart turns away. Solomon's life teaches us that: 1. Wisdom alone is not enough. Obedience is required. 2. Blessings can become a curse if they turn us away from God. 3. Compromise with sin leads to destruction. His downfall was slow and subtle, but it was inevitable the moment he stopped putting God first. So let us learn from Solomon's mistakes and remember his final conclusion in Ecclesiastes: "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Ecclesiastes 12:13. Because in the end, it is not our wealth, wisdom, or power that will matter, but our relationship with God.